David. How you doing, man?
Good, Lou. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm so excited to have Jonny here. Hey, Jonny.
Me too. Hey, Jonny.
Hello, fellas. Happy to be here again on a rainy night.
I feel like I could fly fish on my sidewalk this evening.
I tried practicing spay casting last weekend in the Catskills, and it was ice. So, you need an anchor for spay casting. So when I would sleep back, my fly line would go skidding back like 70 feet, like the exact opposite of what you want. Right. It's actually like hockey with a spay rod. But that's not what we're here to discuss.
No,
well,
it's not.
I think, it was Henry last week was saying that he fished every manhole cover in Brooklyn.
Oh, I've done it.
There are some New York stories here. For
good
sure.
stories. Sure. Before we get going, let's just give everybody the update on the rest of our dates going forward. Yeah. So look at that. We have Jonny King, as you can see there. Our next guest on March 19th is Jason Taylor. And on April 2nd, we've got the Chocolate Factory. We've got Blaine Chocolate. And boy, that's, looking from here to the end of the season is looking so great with you guys. I'm psyched about this.
Yeah, what a lineup. And we're incredibly thankful to Jonny and to everyone else for joining. We had a great session last week with Henry Cowan. So welcome back, Jonny. I mean, Jonny is the OG Masters of the Fly. I mean, he was really our first, one of our first fly tying guests in the first season. And I remember incredibly memorable was when you came on with Bob Popovics. And obviously this season is a tribute to Pops. So it's fitting that we have you back. We're excited to hear, maybe at the end of this session, a little bit about your reflections on, your relationship with Pops and what he means to all of us. But hey, we're here to tie squids tonight.
We are. And you were telling me a story about how you and Bob used to correspond constantly about squid, and that's kind of what brought us to this fly. So, feel free to elaborate.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me back. And I'm reminded of what a small community is, because as I see the names coming across, I see tons of friends. I saw Steve Ferraro, who I haven't seen in a long time. My good friend Mark Sherman just joined, and he and Joe Maz, who are also on, call me Jonny the Squid or Squiddy. Sometimes Henry Cowan calls me Squidly, and that goes back to my obsession with squid. So yeah, I was just quickly, we can talk about Bob. Tons of people, and there's Brad. Tons of people were friends with Bob, right? He was everybody's best friend. But after I met him, which was probably about 2004, maybe 22 years ago, we started up this correspondence, and I started to fish with him. And I started to tie squid flies. And part of my impetus for tying squid flies was actually Kenny Abrams, who once came to me years ago. I knew him for a long time, leaned over to me and sort of said to me, like Secret Agent Man, fish squid flies, right? Because, you don't see squid all the time, right? You might see them in the rips or something. But so I started this correspondence with Bob about squid, and I probably have a novel's worth of emails back and forth with Bob about squid, about their proportions, about how to fish them. And I would send him flies I had sort of was playing around with. He would critique them, he would improve them. So I brought some of those to show you how they evolved. Yeah. But what I learned through the years is, so I remember I was out with Mark Sherman, who's on, and I don't remember if Maz was on the boat. Henry was not on that one. We're all people who fish, Brooklyn and New York. And I brought out a squid fly, and Mark said in his inimitable voice, "Yeah, give it a try. What the hell? What could happen?" So I caught a bunch of fish, hence my nickname. And then I started to realize that I was starting to see, sometimes you catch let's say a big bluefish, and they'd spit up a squid, or a stripe would spit up a squid. I have a great picture Mark sent me of a squid impaled on a clouser. I don't remember what time we were fishing, but every so often they take a swipe at a fly or actually get hooked. And the thing is, they're not around just in the spring, like everyone says. There have been some really good squid runs in the fall. I've had them chase my flies out in Montauk in October. But right there in New York City. So they're all over the place. They're great to fish, and they're unbelievably fun if you're a fly tyer, because they're really challenging. So I thought, in honor of Bob and all the correspondence I had with him, we'd tie a squid fly.
I love it.
With you guys.
Great.
I love it.
And so I was just going to show you some through the years. So the first I probably tied this fly, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. It's just been in this box that I bring to shows. And this was inspired by Bob. He had all the synthetic squids and the Shady Lady squid, right, which had fleece. This was called an emergent sparkle squid. And many of your trout fishermen, Gary LaFontaine, has this sort of bubble caddis pattern, which has this bubble of synthetics. So I created this bubble. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's 360 degrees, cool. Made it really. And what I did is I've tried to, one of the things you'll notice about squid is the heads are, often the eyes on squid will be pinned together, right? But squid have wide heads. So I was always trying to figure out how to get some width in the head itself. Bob had a great squid where he used a little piece, he called it the rear floating squid. I'm sure Steve and some others on the call remember it. And he took a foam cylinder and placed the feathers around the cylinder. So at some point I found this synthetic stuff. Maybe I got it from Brad Buzzy, who's on there. I can't remember what it's called, but gooey skin, gummy skin, buzzy skin, something like that. And I would lay the feathers on it, glue them on, and then create like a little cylinder and slide it over the back of this. Can't really see it, but it's sort of a circle. So this fly is probably the most effective squid fly I ever tied. Caught tons of fish on it, but it only would last 1 or 2 fish. So I started looking elsewhere. So I tried lots of different things. I tried squids that were made entirely of feathers. This one happens to be articulated. But this is just wrapped, what do you call that stuff? Polar chenille and feathers. You twist them together like people do on woolly buggers, like Cheech does for fly fish food. But you can make this great body. It's 360 degrees. And that's a good one if you want a squid that sinks. Here's one. I found this in my box. I don't know where this comes from. Apparently I tied this at some point in my life. But that's a bunch of Senyo's laser dub. That's like a hoo fly. That one sinks really well. But my favorite was always to take the bait fish that I like to tie, a Kinky Muddler, and tie a squid with it because you can really get some dimension, right? Squid are 360-degree animals, and tie a squid with it. So that's what we're going to do. There's lots of different ways to do them. I've done them with mono extensions off the back to get the eyes, the head, and the tentacles off the back. I've done them with tubes that I fix to the back of the hook. This is on an articulated shank. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a total production of this squid fly. I'm going to use as many materials as possible. Not because that's practical, not that because that's what I would do, but I think when I've talked to people at shows, and I've tied at zillions of shows and shops, they're always intrigued. Something grabs them, right? Like some material, and they'll come up with their own squid patterns. And I've seen some amazing ones. So I figured we'll illustrate some of those. And this will have fox fur and articulated shank. It'll have feathers. It'll have something called sculpting flash fiber. It'll have kinky fiber. It'll have David Nelson squimpish hair. It'll have some polar chenille. And you could use a million other variations. I like this version when you don't need to fish it too deep. It's got some bulk to it, as you can see. So on a 350 line, it'll get down, but not the way a clouser will. But if you're in the top 5 feet or something, this fly works great for me.
And Jonny, when you think about a squid, what are the key characteristics that you kind of focus on imitating that make it different from a different kind of bait fish?
Well, so part of the reason Bob and I became friends is I was always obsessed with this match the hatch thing. And I said, Bob, it just seems like the squid flies out there, like the proportions are all wrong. And he said 100%. So that's sort of what kicked off our correspondence and fishing together about it. And the thing about the squid we have here are mostly long fin squid. I think that's the Latin name, Loligo palei, I think is what they're called. So even though they're called long fin squid, they don't actually they have kind of short tentacles. So proportionally, a squid is about 2/3 mantle. That's the body from, let's say, the head to the tip. And then the tentacles, which are about 1/3. There are other species where that changes. But the thing about a squid's mantle, its body, is it's entirely rigid because it has something in the middle of it called a pen, which you would think is kind of like a bone, but it's not. It's actually a shell. It's like an internalized shell. And then you have the head, right? And then you have the tentacles that move like crazy. One of the toughest things to imitate on a squid are the swim fins up front. So while the body, you've seen squid can jet forward and backwards. So while the body remains rigid, the swim fins kind of undulate in the current. This was Bob's particular favorite. I used to actually layer fox fur in the Kinky Muddler material. that is like a serious project and it's very easy to trim it off. So I looked for other ways to do it. And I found David Nelson's Swimpish hair does a really good job of it with less drama. But the key thing, Luyen, is the 2/3, 1/3 thing, and to focus your movement around the head and the tentacles, right? The squid can bend and turn.
And that, I mean, just a personal story for everybody. I a few years ago, and I was talking to David about this earlier today. You know, we don't get kind of the squid hatch that you associate with sort of Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod and Massachusetts here in Montauk, but we had a really good squid run a couple of years ago, and David and I caught a couple of really big striped bass out at Montauk in June, and so I was tying squid flies, and I sent you, Jonny, a picture of one that I tied, and I remember I like vividly, you know, you're like, great fly, the tentacles are too long. And and I, you know, it's funny because I have here, like, you know, Bob Popovics' legendary book even, and
yeah, look at that.
Think of the squid as having these super long tentacles, and you sent me about 10 pictures of actual squid, and it was so clear that the proportions were like what you have on your screen now. It was just completely revelatory, and I think that's like the little thing, as you said, like we tie flies to imitate flies, and often we're not actually tying them
exactly. I mean, that's what I learned is like after I learned the basics of fly tying is like you almost want to put them aside and say what actually looks like the food that I'm imitating. So that applies for a mayfly or a caddisfly or a sand eel, right? Like people don't realize like the top of a sand eel is translucent. The belly is opaque, total opposite of a bay anchovy. But you don't notice that unless you stick the thing in your hand or you watch it swim in the water. Same thing with squid. I have swum through squid while snorkeling. But the most amazing squid thing I saw is Bob sent me like a National Geographic video, and there's a school of squid swimming. And these are Caribbean reef squid, which are proportionally colored just like our squid. And this big barracuda comes. It's really well filmed. The second the barracuda comes, the entire school of squid orients itself in the exact same position as some brown coral on the bottom and all turns the exact rusty brown of the coral.
Wow.
Barracuda swims away. They all sit up. They become that kind of milky, grayish, rusty white and swim on.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I think I've seen that film, how quickly they change color. And that was
instantly
the thing they were talking about. So I know with all the different materials you're using, somehow you're trying to mimic that as well through the tying process.
Yeah, they have these things called chromatophores, which change color all the time. So it's not that you have to be one color, but I like to mix different colors in it. So maybe we should actually tie one.
Yeah,
let's do it. Let's do it. And actually, David
and I will get off
screen.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't know, whatever your guys' mechanism for questions, I hope people will interrupt me because I don't want to just sit here.
It'll be our mouths.
We'll monitor as we go here.
Okay.
So let's see here.
All right, I'm going to put on my dorky reading glasses, having reached sufficient age where they are necessary. All right. So
one quick
very
question.
Dignified.
It is. It's very. One quick question that somebody wants to know before you get going is what kind of vice is that?
So this is called a law vice, LAW, Lawrence Waldron. It is now a collector's item. This would be like the Charlton fly reel of vices. Mm-hmm. When I bought it, I bought it 20-something years ago. It was just a regular vice. It was expensive. It cost like what a Renzetti cost, but it's made by a guy who lives out in the middle of nowhere in England. I doubt he's making them anymore. And it's an extraordinary vice. And it's just sort of an amazing thing. The way you fix things in the jaws is you just have this little star wheel. So it can hold a 5/0 hook with just the slightest turn. It's actually not so good with I see somebody said Waldron stopped making them several years ago. Yeah, there are imitations of law vice, but you see them on eBay for like preposterous amounts of money. Okay. So we're going to do the head and tentacles on I think there's a 20 millimeter shank. You use one of Blaine shanks or you could really use anything. I like the shank because it makes the head hinged and move freely. Mm-hmm. And I also like to use a less buoyant material in the back because I do not want the back of the squid lifting up. If it's going to be anyway, I prefer it that way. And also I'm going to be stripping it. So I don't want it, I don't want that back trapping air. Mm-hmm. So what I'm gonna do, and I use this fine mono thread. This stuff is uni fine mono. This stuff is probably very easy to break. Look, but I prefer finer thread because you don't need strength and thread for material. You just snap this off. You guys all know that trick. How you don't ever really need to use scissors when you attach thread. Just tie it on, do a bunch of wraps, and snap it this way.
Oh, wow.
All right.
Okay.
So for the tentacles, the key thing is you want stuff that moves and that won't be too heavy and that you can blend the colors. So, I tie also like a lot of steelhead flies and stuff. I have all this different Arctic fox. Arctic foxtail is really readily available. Cool thing about this stuff is if you grab 2 clumps and you comb them, I forgot my brush, unfortunately, but if you put them together, their colors will blend really well. So what I'll do is I have sort of a tan, and I don't know what you would call that, like a rusty orange. There's a lot of rust and brown in squid. Not always, sometimes when they're alarmed, but when you see them, when you pull them out of the water, they're often kind of white, but when they're swimming around, you often see, I don't know if you guys know Jeff Becker. He used to fish. Yeah. He was a guide out in Long Island. Jeff used to fish squid flies all the time, and he just wanted brown squid all the time. All right. So I just took the tan and the rust and added them together. Remember, we want this short because I'm going to do like, I don't know, 5 or 6 inch fly. Now, one thing about squid fly tentacles is people tend to tie them in a way where they just draw together so narrowly that they have no profile. I like to have some flair with them. So if they're flared, like if you think about a space style fly, something like that, you have sort of a collar. Remember, you're going to be stripping that thing, so then it'll draw in, but when you stop, it's going to flare open. If you tie them in too narrowly, it'll just kind of sit there. It'll drag along like a piece of seaweed. So what I'll do is I'll take this fox fur, and it's almost like tying a hollow fly. I'll just trap it with 1 or 2 wraps of thread, right? No pressure. Then I'll loosen the thread and just sort of adjust it around the shank. Well, I'm saying, yeah, it's literally a shank, not a hook, right? And then I'll wrap it back on itself. Normally, if I thought to bring a little comb, I'd comb out some of the underfur, and I'll post it back. Because this is all going to be covered up, I actually am going to do what you don't do on a hollow fly, right? In a hollow fly, you just build up a dam of thread in front of it.
Dam, so you're tying over it, right?
It just makes it a little easier. It still gives it enough. Check it out. It still has enough loft, right?
Yeah.
So that, and it seems like it's well. So there's lots of stuff I can use to get the speckling. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen this stuff. It's called Predator Wrap, and it comes in barred colors. My favorite is barred orange, but it is a sort of sparkly. I wouldn't say it's quite flashy, but it's kind of translucent. It comes on a cord, and can you guys see the colors there? It's sort of, this is a barred orange. So it's extremely useful stuff for tentacles. So what I do is I'll snap off some of these. You can actually wrap it like a hackle. I think I'm going to do that now. But I'll take this material, split it in half, and maybe I don't want the ends to be like a paintbrush, so I'll stagger them, pull a little front and back. I'll lace them on the top, trap it with a few wraps of thread, and fold this material back so I've covered the top 180 degrees.
And right? Jonny, what was that material called again, and what was the color?
It's called Senyo's Predator Wrap. Greg Senyo is a steelhead Midwestern guy. He works at Schultz Outfitters, and he's come up with some cool materials. And it's just it's great for trout flies. It's great for like a more subtle mottled flash.
What's the color? What's the color of that particular one called?
This one is I think it's called black barred orange.
Okay.
And I like orange. There are olives,
orange,
pinks. Yep. So I'm going to flip this over. And if you saw, like, I haven't done more than 2 or 3 wraps for anything. So I'm using this incredibly, I'm using incredibly fine thread, right? Like thread that you could snap. This thread is fine enough to tie a Griffith's gnat. But you don't need pressure. I couldn't pull this out if I had a pair of pliers, right? So that looks pretty good, right? But I'm also I tie a lot of dry flies. So I have millions of necks. This is a grizzly variant dyed, I don't know, they call it March Brown or something. You never use the stuff at the top of the neck, but look at all those cool feathers. And they're all mottled and have different colors. So just grab some of these.
I think, Jonny, we used to call that a Cree, didn't we?
This is not a Cree. The true Cree is really like a grizzly with black and tan barring. This is just a barred grizzly. I actually like this better. You can see it sort of got black, little orange. And then technically squid have 8 tentacles, but we've got all this other stuff in there. I usually just tie, a few on the top, a few on the bottom. And you don't want them to you don't want to mess up your proportions by doing what Luyan and I described, right? That looks cool, but once you put that on even a long shank hook, and I'm going to use a big hook here, it's going to make it too long. So I usually make it go about the length of the fox fur. And one thing you can do is you can trap it, very light thread wraps, and then just pull it back. It'll get jostled out of place, but I've got that on the near side of the shank towards me. I'll tie one towards you guys, and maybe I'll make it a little too long, and then I will pull it towards me. Again, was that 2 wraps, 3 wraps? Maybe we'll do a couple on the bottom. This is maybe a little more like a badger color. That's fine. Not too much barring in this. Often I'll mix. I'll do a little tan, a little grizzly, some pink. It doesn't matter because squid change so much. The critical thing is that you want color variegation, right? Same thing when I tie trout streamers. I tie tons of trout streamers. I spay fish for trout all the time. I don't think I ever use a single colored fly. Like I don't use a yellow fly and olive fly. I always have multiple colors in my flies.
And would you also say your proportions are important in this?
Well, they're everything for squid fly. If you don't get the proportions right, I don't believe that they're taking it for squid fly because remember, if you're like in the Monomoy rips and they're freaking out and they're on squid, those fish are so lit up. You throw something orange or tannish orange this long, they're going to hit it. But I had an amazing experience once. I was fishing with a guy named Ricky Fink, who's friends with a lot of guys. He doesn't fish anymore. He's friends with Mark and Maz and everything. Ricky and I were fishing, and I was stripping in a squid fly, and I had it at the boat, like leader in the boat. And then a striper, about 10 or 12 pounds, comes, and he looks at it. And I'm like, oh, wow, what am I going to do? So I just held it there. Now, I think, so David, you would know better than anybody. If a fish inspects your fly for 20 or 30 seconds, he will not eat it, right? Like you're done.
Pretty much not. I've had stripers literally come up and nose a fly and decide not to eat it.
Generally, the longer they inspect it, the lower your chances. So this striper,
Absolutely.
right? I'm literally like this. This striper is just circling the squid fly. I'm like, Ricky, what do I do? Look, it's a really nice fish. And I was like, I don't want to pull it up. I know he's not going to eat it. So I sort of moved my rod here and the thing lunged and ate it. I ended up losing the fish, but that's the longest I've ever had a fish inspect my fly and still eat it. Right. And that was actually probably one of these flies, right? Which is super realistic in terms of proportions. But anyway.
Super selective. It's like a trout, as you said, it's like a trout eating a midge or a PMD. Hey, Jonny, you mentioned you're using that really light mono thread. So is the reason for the small diameter that because you want to be able to do a lot of wraps and not create bulk, or what?
Absolutely.
Why do you like that?
I just, you know what? I tie big saltwater unless I'm like cranking down on deer hair or bucktail. I use like the biggest I'll ever use is maybe 3/0 thread, but I tie a lot of saltwater flies with like 8, 10, 12/0 thread. Because other than materials that won't grip, you get 2 or 3 well-placed wraps with light thread hold as well as, gel spun that has like a pound cast that you could land a marlin on.
Yeah.
It's not the amount of pressure. There's certain things you are slippery if you're trying to tie in squirrel tail or if you're trying to flare really coarse deer hair. But I flare deer hair with 12/0 thread. Anyway. So we're going to make a head. We've got the tentacles, but now we need something that's a little cylindrical for the head. So I'm going to use this stuff called sculpting flash fiber.
Yep.
Pretty cool stuff. It's unlike, we have the famous Steve Farrar I saw on the line. So this is Steve Farrar Flash Blend, which is kinky fiber, slinky fiber, blended with flash. We're going to use that for the body of the fly. But since I want that.
And a quick question. As you move from phase to phase, are you tacking it down with any cement or glue, or you're just moving along?
No, I don't use a lot of glue. I often don't even add any kind of varnish or glue to the heads of my flies. Sometimes if I put anything on my flies, what I use is brush on super glue, like Loctite. I'll take it, put a little dab on the tip of my bodkin and put it on. But once again, I just, I guess it would help maybe, but I like small heads on my flies. I usually don't have a lot of exposed thread wraps. On Kinky Muddlers, because I'm gluing on eyes, I have that liquid fusion surrounding it anyway, so that sucks into the thread wraps. But by and large, I don't fuss with it. So there's a lot of things, right? Like with trout flies, you gotta glue your heads, right? When you actually try them and you try doing it another way, you realize, okay, everyone does it that way. That doesn't mean that it's necessary. All right, so this stuff, sculpting flash fiber, what's amazing about it is, so it's a much finer synthetic, and unlike the Farrar blend, it compresses when you tie it down. So you can tie it in smaller quantities, make smaller things. And we just want a little head here, right? Well, that one is actually made with Steve's material, but that's a bigger head. But if we're going to do a little bit smaller head like that, that's the material we're about to use. And it's really compressible. And unlike, it sort of has a texture like EP fibers, but unlike EP fibers, this stuff sinks unbelievably well. If you tie any kind of streamer with this, even if I pack it tightly, the second that thing gets saturated, it just drops like a stone. I don't know why that is, but it's probably the only synthetic I know that's like this, that I can make these heads, and it sinks really fast. So I have kind of a grayish color here. This is called silver gray and redfish. I just grabbed some stuff out of my box. I have a million other colors there. Also, this stuff takes marker really well. So what we're going to do is I grabbed a couple of hanks of it. I'm going to lay them on top of each other, right? And then maybe I'll mix them a little bit, but I don't really care. Like, all I want is for there to be some color. Snip this up. So now this part, since I did do a Kinky Muddler in earlier versions of this, and I've shown that fly a zillion times at shows and stuff, I'm going to tie it the same way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do these V-ties, right? Mm-hmm. So what I mean by a V-tie is I'm going to tie the material in so it creates, there you're looking at the top. It's going to create a V like that. The reason is, if I tied it just like a regular high tie, that would just be in one plane, up and down. But I want this 360 degrees. So the easiest thing in the world to do is go like this. So check this out. I got one wrap there, 2 wraps. That is it. I don't need any more. Fold it back. I've created my little V, right? Catch the tip of that, 2 or 3 wraps. And I'm done. That is it for the wrapping. So you're thinking, this thing is going to fall apart. I've had some things about, I would say it is, I think I once caught like 15 rooster fish on one Kinky Muddler. When you tie it in this way, because all those wraps are surrounded by the material, the fish's teeth never get to the wraps. There's no reason to glue it. So, and I don't like glue. Glue smells like getting on my hand, and then when I play the piano, my fingers stick together. So, somebody's saying, please ask Jonny. I think there's a question in the chat.
Yeah, he's asked, Phil Sheffield is asking if you've seen squid turn magenta when they get fired up.
Yeah, I've seen them turn I've seen them both in person and like even down in Baja, and I've seen them, there's almost no color. I've seen them turn blue, purple, I guess magenta, a lot of rust and brown, and the videos are just incredible. What is the name of that really good underwater photographer?
I think it was Planet Earth actually showed it.
The guy's name, I don't know him. His name was Mike Laptew, but he used to take all these.
Jared just said Mike Laptew.
Yeah, right. He had incredible pictures of squid. You can Google these things. If you want to know what a longfin squid looks like, you want to find a longfin squid fly, or you want a bay anchovy, or you want a river herring, or whatever it is, it's like the easiest thing in the world. I always look up fly, bait fish and bugs when I'm tying flies.
Jonny, what's the name of that material again? Somebody's asking.
Sculpting flash fiber. If you don't want the flash in it, but the flash is very modest, it's just called sculpting fiber. So let me just show you something. I don't know how clear it's getting. I'm just doing the V types front and back. Let me just show you how compressible this stuff is. So I have a pretty good size hunk there, right? Just trap it with one wrap. But look at it, just pinches right in there, like with unlike most other, because most other, for instance, squimpish hair is solid. It doesn't compress at all. It's not that this hair is not solid, but its crinkle, its loft is because it's crinkly. So when you crank down on it, it goes basically right down to the wire of the hook, or in this case, the shank. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So as always, with any of these flies you're tying, these synthetics, it looks like hell. It looks like someone stuck their finger in a socket until you, trim it down. Yeah, Henry just added, sculpting flash fiber is produced by the same people. It's just add H2O,
H2O. Yeah.
That do Steve's Farrar blend. You know, Renzetti is now the primary importer of that stuff. So you can get it from Renzetti, and Hairline has it too. All right. So if you look, I don't know, I did 2 or 3 wraps, right? I changed the procedure for the front of the shank because because I want to have a small head on the fly, right? I don't want to, if you notice, I have been trapping the material and getting these little lumps under it, but I want to hide that lump. And now I'm going to do just a high tie. So I'm going to take that and just do 1 or 2 wraps. Tighten the dice here, right? 1 or 2 wraps. Maybe I could get a little bit more of this material. So this, by the way, this is the first time I've gone back for the material. From that one hank, I was able to get all the material for the set. And what I'll do is I've got another hank. I'll flip it over, right? 1, 2, that's it. But I might look around and I might say, well, you know, I can see the thread wraps there. So maybe I'll take some of this hank. Because remember, all of this material, whatever I have tied down, it's actually going to double itself when I push this material back. So I need less than would appear. And I'm going to trim away probably 50% of it anyway. Okay, so look, it's messy. I've tied some down. Doesn't matter because we're going to trim it down. I'm going to push that all the way back. You know, it's nice to have a little pushing tool, but you don't need it. And one thing, this material, again, unlike other synthetics, like I can't do this quite as easily with the Slinky fiber and the Farrar blend. It doesn't take many wraps to post it back. It's already almost done, right? Because it's not as stiff, it's more pliable. It's just a really interesting.
And are you wrapping over it there like you did before?
So in other words, I am not. I'm not doing that, right? You see that big, because there's no reason to do that. And also think about, I don't know, a picture of a squid, but a squid's head, it almost looks like the eyes are on these like little knots, right? It looks like you got the eyes here, you've got some width here, and so I don't want to have like a little, I don't want this to look like a Thunder Creek streamer because that's how squid looks.
Yeah.
Okay. That's probably enough. So I'm going to just whip finish it. One thing I will tell you, when you use this mono thread, particularly this fine stuff, you got to do multiple whip finishes because this wants to do the avalanche thing, right? Especially if you wrap it up the ramp. And while it holds well and it holds this material well, it's springy, right? So if you don't do multiple whip finishes, if you nick the thread, you know, I'm putting it on here and I nick it with this really sharp point of this hook, it comes undone. If you do 2 or 3 whip finishes, it's fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
And I'm only doing a 3-turn whip finish. It's another myth that like a whip finish on a trout fly should have 5 or 6 turns. Like 3 is enough. Okay, so now I've got this messy thing, right? What I wanted, the easiest way to trim this to look like a squid head is first of all to find the back end of where I want my head to be. So I want, you know, think about a squid. Let's say your tentacles are this long. The head is going to be maybe a third as long as the tentacle. So I will find the back end, and then I will just use my rotary vise to eliminate all that material that trails back too far, right? Now, some people, there are still people out there who don't use rotary vices. I can tell you, I could not, you know, God bless you, and all your limitations and prejudices, but I can't do it. Like I need it. I need it. So now we have this ridiculous looking thing. Now my goal is to make that head taper gently into the tentacles. So the easiest way to do that, I'm not even going to take it out of the vise. I'm going to squeeze it, right? Side to side. I'm going to use my fingers as kind of a guide.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just like you did with the Kinky Muddler.
Yep, pretty much. It's easier with this material.
Aggressive though. Like it's incredible. Wow. There you go. Yep.
Same thing on the bottom. And remember, we're not dealing with a hook point here, right? This is just like a freestanding little tentacle thing. So I did that side to side to get the top and bottom. But the problem is I haven't done that. Now I have to squeeze it top and bottom because I have all that excess material there. So I don't know how well this is showing, but can you see all that extra long hair sticking up there?
Yep.
Same deal. Flip it over this way. And then if you want to, be fancy about it, you can kind of do what I call advanced barbershop, tape it a little bit.
Yeah, Jonny, I can see in your future, if you're no longer a lawyer, you could be a beautician.
Actually, that's what I aspire to.
Yeah.
I am beautiful. All right, so there we have the head. Now all we need to do is put some eyes on it. I'll show you how I put eyes on. Well, actually, I'm not going to show you completely how to do it. So this is a glue called E6000. Like if you go onto eBay, you can buy these little bottles of it, maybe 10 for 15 bucks. Don't get the big bottle because that'll get all congealed, right? This one I can use it, and if it starts to get gunky inside, I just throw it away. But you could tie hundreds of flies with one of these little bottles. What you do is take a little dab of this, like a little bead, and you put one on either side of the head, dead center. I like it dead center. One thing I'll say about squid eyes is they're really prominent. If you actually look at them, they're not as big as the eyes most of us use. They're very prominent because they got this black pupil on this pearly white background. Mm-hmm. But these are called pro sport fisher eyes. So what they are is they're realistic eyes, but they're flat. They're not dome eyes. You can use dome eyes if you want. But so the temptation would be to use one of these giant ones. That's just not true to how squid are. So I make them a little oversized, but I don't want them to completely dominate this head. Just want them.
What is it, Jonny, about that E6000 versus any other adhesive that you like?
Well, typically what I do is it just dries quickly and it's very flexible. I think it's probably similar to Goop. I don't remember Drew Chacon or someone was using it. And it's just, I just find the consistency of it is really good for holding eyes on. I almost don't use it for anything else. So look, got the eyes on there. Now, if I wanted to make sure this was durable, I would do what I do with Kinky Muddlers, right? And by the way, those eyes are on the big side. Often when you put the eyes on you and you squeeze them like that, it'll slightly deform the head. So of course you have to come back in, call your barber, call your beautician, they make it beautiful. Anyway, there you have, so somehow we've managed to turn making that little thing in. What time is it? Did we spend half an hour doing that thing? I mean,
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Awesome.
Anyway, so we'll pick up the pace, but that's going to be the back of the fly. So right now I'm going to use, any questions, let me know. I'm going to use a long shank hook. This is the old Tiemco 911S. Can't get these anymore. This is about a 3/0. It's a big, heavy wire hook. I did once lose the biggest striper I ever hooked on one of these hooks. But you can use spinnerbait hooks. Gamakatsu spinnerbait hooks are pretty good. They're not quite strong enough. Although a friend of mine, I tied him one of these squid flies, James Shaughnessy, who owns Beulah Fly Rod, actually caught a marlin free casting on one of these flies, and it was a Gamakatsu spinnerbait hook. But the even better are the owner ones. They're a little stouter wire. You can buy them. You have to look in tackle shops, not in fly time.
Yeah, I have a bunch of those gammy spinnerbait hooks.
They're awesome. They're really good for poppers too.
Yep.
All right.
Use them for tuna flies.
Yeah. Well, so if they're holding tuna,
Yeah.
All right. So here's the thing. If any of you tie articulated flies like the Kelly Gallup streamers, what they'll often do is they'll have the wire back here and they'll put a bead in to prevent the back end from coming up too close. I have not found that necessary. I'm using this stuff. What is this? Beadalon. David Nelson had this on his desk, gave it to me.
Oh, yeah. Good stuff.
It's beading wire. It's 18 inches, 40.46 millimeters. It's strong enough. So
and I'm using that same stuff for shock tip when I'm going for bluefish. Just go to Michael's and pick it up.
Yeah, and it comes in. It's cheaper than it's the same stuff that's sold as wire, plastic.
American wire. Yeah.
Right. So what I'm going to do is now, in theory, right, we want this to be vertical, right? We want the loop to stick back vertically because if it's lateral and horizontal, you can't get it through this hook eye. But I don't really worry about it because I'll show you what you can do. Just attach it to one side of the hook, right? Get this guy on here. And then attach it so it goes a little bit back because we're going to use some of the Farrar blend that we did for the body of the fly to veil this a little bit. Maybe I'll put it that far back. So I'm just randomly putting it on there. I'm not worried about it. However, to make sure it's oriented properly, as I wrap back, I don't know how well you guys can see this, I hold it up. So now it's oriented vertically. I usually cock it up a little bit. And then here's the most important thing. Put some thread wraps under it. right? And the way to do that is lift it up, swing this around. You can grab it with these fingers. I do this for lots of things. Almost any fly, let's say I had a bunny strip or hackles like a deceiver, I do that because propping it up does an amazing job of preventing fouling. And I've never really had these foul, but that's about the right distance. So now we're going to have a body that's like roughly that long, and the tentacles, which are, proportionally, maybe it's a third, maybe a little bit bigger, but it's going to be 2/3, 1/3 is like a pretty good ratio. All right. So that's the back half of the blade. By the way, another material you can use if you don't want to do the Kinky Muddler thing is this stuff is good. I just grabbed this to show you. This stuff is Blaine. I know you're going to have Blaine chocolate on. This is Blaine's Game Changer chenille. It's a two-sided chenille. You can wrap that really tightly and get something that's sort of like a Kinky Muddler, right? That has the three-dimensional head. And then you use a marker. It takes marker really well. This stuff takes marker well, too. All right. So now, let's see what we have. We're going to put aside this sculpting flash fiber, and we're going to use the Farrar blend or just straight slinky fiber. I called it Kinky Muddler because back in the day when it was first made by Henry, what was the name of that? Successful. It was actually called Kinky fiber. But anyway, I just grabbed some different colors here. So here's like they call this camel. It's like a rusty brown. Here's some white. Here's some bright orange. Here's some pink. Here's some tan. I'm just going to randomly mix this stuff, tie it in. The default is going to be what they call mullet brown. By the way, one thing about, sorry, what'd you say, David?
I love the mullet brown. When I tie my jellyfish in the fall, I do a lot of mullet brown. So,
yeah, and one thing about this, a couple of things about mullet brown. So the different colors of Kinky fiber and Farrar blend can actually have different consistencies for whatever reason. The mullet brown tends to be a little wirier than some other colors, but that's okay for this pattern. One thing that I do want to say is while I can pack this stuff super tight so it looks like a bass bug, I'm not going to do that. It makes it less translucent and it also makes it more prone to trap air. So if there are little gaps here and there, I don't care. So I grabbed this brown stuff. Maybe we'll, for funsies, as my daughters would say, we'll take a little pink, right? So that's a pretty healthy bunch. I think I'm going to chill that out a little bit. All right.
I'm sure Henry Cowan is loving the pink right now.
Except there's no olive and white in it. That's what he would love. All right. So here's the thing. I'm going to want this material to veil back. If it goes over the eyes, that's okay because I can trim it away, but I don't want it to end there because I don't want the joint to be conspicuously obvious. So what I'll do is I'll flip this guy over. I'll do the same thing. I'll tie it in the V-tie. I've got it back to just slightly veil over the eyes. I'll do 1, 2. This stuff is wirier and tougher. It doesn't compress as much. So when I do the V-tie, if you could see it, so you could see it's on the near side of the shank. I'm going to fold it around the hook bend, right? I'm going to catch the very tip of it. Let me just wind up here. And I'm going to do 2, 3 wraps. That's it. Still have this material. Trim it off. And I don't worry about any tapering, right? But to get more out of this material, since it's shorter now, I might pull it on either end because it's okay if you have a regular length ends. So I can now install the next V either directly on top of the thread wraps or right in front of it. Sometimes I'll start right in front of it, 1, 2, but I'll fold it back and I'll end up right over that other bump. So I've got a bump on the top and the bottom. But that's okay because that bump, that lump, which I'm not even going to bother gluing, is going to be hidden. So I had this other thing, but let's try a different color. Maybe we'll put in some orange. Would be a good combination. Orange and pink is actually a great combination. That's another color somebody asked about magenta. You see a lot of pink in squid, like the little. And then let me show you something really cool. So here I've got a little orange and pink. Remember this stuff that we used? This was the predator wrap. You can actually mix this in, right? Grab some of these fibers and just lay it right on top of the slinky fiber, right? So I've just put it right there. When I tie this in and it gets all mixed up, it's going to make the body kind of speckled. And I don't do it all over the place because the speckles are irregular on a squid. So look, I've got this big messy thing. I'm not worried about it, but I don't know if you can see particularly when I trim that, some of that modeling is now going to be built into the material. One other thing I should tell you is one thing, and it took me a while to realize this. A lot of times with squid, they'll be slightly darker on the dorsal surface than the bottom surface. Don't know what that's about, but I've observed that many times. Bob confirmed that to me. So sometimes maybe I'll put some slightly darker stuff on top. Anyway, just going to keep cranking these V ties in. 1, 2.
And Jonny, while you're tying, what is your bobbin of choice?
These are, so I have a lot of materials from CNF. That's that Japanese company that makes the fancy foam fly boxes. And I used to have a relationship with them. So they send me these bobbins. These are really nice bobbins. You do have to thread it through this little foam. It comes out of foam, so it's sort of controlled. What I would tell you, though, about bobbins is you can also use like a really cheap knockoff that you find on eBay, and it's fine. And I use that to tie tiny little emergers and stuff. So I don't know, among things in fishing that excite me, bobbin don't make the top 10 list. So I'm kind of happy with all. Right.
That predator material is amazing, Jonny, because I remember trying to reverse engineer one of your flies, and I was trying to figure out how you got that barring in there, and I ended up using like barred, rubber legs that you'd put in a.
You can do that. It just doesn't. There's something about this stuff remains kind of translucent, which I really like.
It blends in better with the material. It's amazing.
Yeah, I like that. That's really interesting how that. Well, it's going to look great when you trim it.
And also, and the thing is, it's not like it's any harder to tie the fly by putting it in there. And you get a huge amount so I'm going to do a little bit more of a rusty color. But the whole point is, that's why these flies are really fun to tie, because you could put in any color. People tie blue ones. I have seen blue in squid, and I definitely saw a picture of a squid that was like really blue in chartreuse. It was amazing. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, like how many people on this call actually fish squid flies with any regularity as like a searching fly. I'm not talking about like in the rips, but like we'll throw, like, do you guys or anyone else, I just think it's sort of underrated.
That's a great question. Jared says guilty. Yeah. How many people here throw squid flies as a searching pattern the way you might like a clouser
or
deceiver? Just curious. That's a great question. Because I tend to think of it more as a specific pattern fly, but
exactly. But I think I again, so obviously if you're surrounded by 10 million bay anchovies, you could tell the fish are on that, or it's like the big sand eels that you get in the late fall in New York, right? You're going to fish imitations of that. And stripers, are like trout. They, get baits and they get fixated on them. But a lot of times,
Mark Sherman said he only does it with you.
Yeah.
Well, Tom said something that I think is right, and Peter Jenkins says this as well. That oftentimes when you see small sand eels around, they're actually squid feeding on them, and a lot of times the bigger fish are actually eating the squid that are feeding on those smaller forage fish.
I think I one time saw some really baby squid. I was fishing in New Rochelle or some like place in New York, and I thought it was a worm hatch. And then we got up close to it, and I think they were baby squid. So somebody just said the monomoy rips, right? So that is like the classic thing, or off of Martha's Vineyard, like that was Jamie. Jamie Boyle has that great pattern, so called the red can squid. That's an interesting thing because the red can squid has a hook this long with the eyes here and the tentacles back here, and it works great. But he's fishing for fish that are really lit up.
Yeah, the great place in the vineyard is Middle Ground, right off Vineyard Haven.
What's that pond in Westport that everyone fishes? Westport, Connecticut.
I'm sure you'll get a lot of hits on the chat on that.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Connecticut guys on here.
Yeah, it's right there, and you can go stand. Haven't done it in years. You can go stand on like the little breachway there and see squid swimming around.
I mean, I used to fish Pear Tree Point there quite a bit.
Mill Pond.
Mill Pond, yeah.
Right.
Thanks,
right. So I think, so that's a pond, and the squid are all over that place. At least I remember seeing, I'm not saying that they're all the time. So look at how many different colors I have on this thing. Maybe we'll do a light one, and then we're going to then we're going to switch to a completely different set of materials to finish off this fly. So,
you got a lot of shank there still. I'm curious how you're going to fill all that up.
Well, I could keep doing it this. Typically, I would just keep doing what I'm doing. But I'm going to, if you, I had one out. We're gonna finish it up with David Nelson's Swimfish fibers. Like I said, I'm making a big production.
Yep.
Well, we could almost rename this the kitchen sink squid.
Exactly. Well, I've tied them with feathers. I've tied them with every form of, I was going to say scrap. I should probably say crap. Known to man. Right?
but Jonny, to your point about squid being a searching pattern too, there are times when, I've caught striped bass on big-eyed clousers down deep in the rips. And, when we pull them up on the boat, they're spitting up squid, and you look at the clouser and you're like, oh, actually, this was like a very poor approximation of what they were actually eating. It had a couple of, saddles in there. It looks kind of like, squiddy. And that's, what it was.
And same thing with, what is it? Like the bluefish. Sometimes bluefish will cough up this kind of like, you can't quite tell what it is. It's kind of like a milky white thing.
That's squid.
Right? It's squid, right? Mm-hmm. They're around, right? Like, so Mark, Sherman, and Joe will testify to some pretty epic late fall squid fishing, right? And I know there are times when the albies like little baby squids. I don't know if any of you know Joe Goodspeed. He's worked for a bunch of different, it's mostly a freshwater guy, but he used to be the Thomas & Thomas fly rod designer, and he became sort of obsessed with fishing for albies from shore. And he was catching a lot of them on a little pink squid fly. That was his thing. He was
when I first started guiding, I used a lot of squid flies for albies and bonito.
You mean when you were here in the city when you were doing it?
When I was in the city and also spending time on Martha's Vineyard with my grandparents, because I fished out of Menemsha a lot, which had tons of squid right through September, October, and everyone would be throwing all this small stuff, and I'd throw on a 5-inch long squid, and you'd see a 10-pound bonito come and charge it. It was great fun.
Yeah, Mark, you used to have that little. Maybe was it Ray Stackelak's pattern? Mark used to have that little. I think he used like a pink rabbit strip or something.
Yeah.
Right. They come in all sizes. As they get bigger, they do get a little harder to imitate. And when they get really big, it's sort of hard to be just like a bucktail deceiver or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But for sort of day in, day out fishing, I think, the sort of 4 to 7 inch range is kind of good. Okay. You know what? That's enough with the kinky fiber. So enough with the kinky fiber. We're going to switch materials because we can, and because it lets me show you another cool material that people may not know. All right. Some of this stuff may come out because I can tie it in very well. What I'm going to do is just keep things normal here. I'm going to trim most of this material out. Hold on, some of that red came done. All right, so and Bob had one of Bob's coolest squids is I remember he gave the fly to somebody, but what he did for the tentacles was he actually took a neck or a saddle and he cut the skin of the saddle and wrapped it around mono. So in other words, he made it like this. So if you imagine that, he circled it around. I bet if Steve Farrar is still on, he would remember that fly. And he tied, he was like a rainbow colored fly. Just the most amazing thing I've ever seen. All right, we're going to just trim this down to shape because we're going to use a different material for the front of it. Same deal. One thing you'll notice about squid is they're kind of wide side to side. They kind of slope up and then slope down towards the head. However, from the top view, one of the widest parts of the squid is right in front of the junction where the head meets the back of the body or the mantle. Get rid of all this stuff. Steve remembers it. I think he gave it, Steve, I think he gave it to John Kelsey, who was, I don't know if you remember him. He was one of those, he was really good tyer. He tied a lot of flat wings. He was a Rhode Island guy. But it was one of my favorite flies of all time that Bob tied. So, so this is a big mess now. Now look, here, let's take this out of the vise. I want to make sure that those eyes and that tentacles can move. So I've got to get this back. I'm going to leave some of this stuff trailing over it, but it's a little hard to get it all on camera. But how are we doing for time?
We're good. We're good. Don't worry. I'm pretty sure people, it's 2 minutes to 9. I'm sure everyone will stick around to see the final product.
Yeah, I certainly don't expect them to. But look, I'm already taming this beast to look something like a little more squid-like, a little more squiddy, as they say. So as you see, I've sort of cut enough to make the eyes visible. And squid have different dimensions, by the way. I could show it. I have a great picture of me holding that squid. Mark sent it to me. Me holding that squid impaled to my clouser, and that was your classic like 5 or 6 inch thing. And again, it's just you wouldn't think you're fishing out inside of, let's say, the Verrazano Bridge, right? Or you're over in New Jersey in Sandy Hook. Right. I just got a quote unquote question from Joe Maz, which said, "Hurry, John, we're going to miss the tide." I'm going to invite you to leave now, Maz. This is the problem. So
God,
now,
look how beautiful that is.
Right?
It is
Amazing.
And
so
we don't even have the squimfish fiber tied
to me, it's like carving, or it's like sprinting deer hair. But look at how cool those colors are. And one thing I will say, more so with the Farrar blend and the sculpting flash fiber, is that this stuff is translucent in the water. Not all of it. So there's a color called bucktail white. By the way, look at these. This is a 4/0 heavy wire hook. I just put it in a little pocket in the jaws, spin that thing. Can't move it. Lift the vise up. One of the things I really like about it. But so the reason that I'm trimming it beforehand is because we're going to use this different technique for the head. So I'm just curious, are people on this call familiar with squimfish fibers?
Yeah, I mean, David and I certainly are, but let's hear from the group. Like, put it in the chat if you know squimfish fibers.
I'm like in love with David Nelson's brush now. Like,
yeah, he ties brushes, and I actually don't tie with brushes. But anyway, that's good enough. So let me just show you. So squimfish.
Everyone's saying yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, we're gonna get David on here next season for sure.
Oh, for sure.
So David, is one of my closest fishing friends. So I get all his offcuts, right? I've got bags and bags of this stuff. You got a little white stuff here. This is not attached to a hide. Sometimes it's attached like craft fur. What squimfish fibers are, it's entirely synthetic. They tend to be, they look like they're tapered. The individual fibers aren't tapered. It's just the lengths are staggered. When they come in this form, you have to stagger them. They're kind of a cross between craft fur. First of all, I can't stand it when people say, this synthetic is a substitute for bucktail. That's just absurd. There's no synthetic like bucktail. There's also no natural material like squimfish fibers or Farrar blend. They all have their own
swim bucktail like that, right? I mean,
yeah,
you could,
right.
but not.
Exactly, and it's not. Bucktail isn't meant to make bulk in bodies. One of the things that if I learned one thing from Bob Popovics more than anything else, was to time my flies in 3 dimensions. All right, here we go. So this squimfish fiber, what's great about it is it moves. You can cut it 1.5 inches and it still moves, but it's got a little stiffness. So it kind of maintains its integrity. So it's not like marabou, which might just collapse again. So here's what we're going to do.
So Jonny, I want to ask you, so you actually made me think of something. With the squimfish, and I have a bunch, but your point about the taper. So it unlike bucktail, it doesn't have a different density or diameter, right? It's all the same, right? Like craft.
Yeah, look at this. This fiber is the same diameter down here as it is at the tip.
Yeah.
But if it's staggered, craft fur isn't tapered either. It's just that it's staggered. It's got under fur. So let's say you have a 4-inch piece of craft fur. Got under fur, then maybe half length and 3/4 length. And every piece of craft fur you buy is different. So, but it is amazing stuff, squimfish fibers, and it's extremely translucent in the water. So we're going to try to put some swim fins on this thing. So I'm going to show you how. First of all, I'm sure you've seen this stuff. Sometimes it's called polar chenille. This is called polar reflector flash, right? It's a little flashy, but it's usually these one-sided wraps. It's like a hackle. It's kind of tangly, and it makes a great underbody for squid because if you put materials over it, the little flashy curliness of it kind of shows through. It kind of glows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie some in and do some wraps. 1, 2, 3. Right? So now I have that material there. That's going to create, you can get this stuff in like orange. I kind of like this coppery color. It's a little metallic, but that's fine. If I'd remembered to...
Hey, Jonny, do me a favor. Can you shift your camera a little bit to your right as you tie towards the... Yeah, it'd be just so we can see. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Awesome.
That was left. Yeah.
So see that? It's like a hackle of synthetics. That you can use anything. There's millions of kinds of wraps, but generally called polar chenille, polar reflector flash, something like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of this squimpish hair. I'm going to grab, there's some white. I'm going to get a little orange. And the other thing about this stuff is, unlike crab fur and other stuff, you can trim it. You can trim it the way you can trim other synthetics and not worry about taper. So I just took some white and some rust. And see, I've got this little bump here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to high tie. I'm going to take it. I'm going to put it here. Let's say I want the wings, fins to go back halfway. I'm going to tie it down in the middle. 1, 2. That's all I did. Use my thumb to surround it, right? And fold it back on itself like this. You know, just a few wraps. It'd be so much better if I brought my comb. But look at that. Now, you know, it's a little long, but you can just sort of randomly trim it. Do the same thing on the bottom. The reason it's staying spread out is because I use that polar chenille to make like a little spreader underneath it.
Yeah.
Here's some pinks. Let's take another polar chenille wrap or two. 1, 2, 3. By the way, you can eliminate all these steps. And I would say a squid fly is not a 10-minute fly, but it's, you know, if you're cranking, it's a 20-minute fly. You don't have to put all these bells and whistles on it, but we're honoring Bob, so. And I get a kick out of trying, you know, I squid with so many different materials. I get a kick out of trying all these different materials. So we'll take some pink. Maybe we'll just do pink because it's going to be layered under it anyway, right? I'll take it, I'll stagger it, I'll do this, I'll fold it back on itself. Stagger it again. Again, I'll lay some on the top. Maybe I can use a little more. I'll use my thumbnail to spread it 180 degrees. I can even do more left and right if I want it to be more, you know, technically the swim fins are on either side. They don't really, when you actually see a squid swimming, you don't see the swim fin so clearly. You see this kind of hazy movement around. Like if you look at a lot of pictures, like some of those Mike Lapke pictures, you actually can't quite make out the dimensions of the swim fins, but what you can tell is that there's something, that there's movement around the side of the body. Hey, I think I did one with you guys where we had Britta Fordyce on. Britta, you know, who is my sort of boss at Rio. She's the one who kind of approves the flies that I submit to Rio. Britta and Patrick Kilby. Britta has a really cool squid fly where she has this long, I don't know what she makes the mantle of, but it's really cool. And she's like me. She's taking videos of it in the sink or in pools. Here, we're going to put this under here. 1, 2. Spread it around. Fold it back on itself. Again, it's too long. Got a little bit of like a wire brush here. So what I'll do is I'll just sort of stagger it. Here's an easy way to stagger cut something. Use the base of your blades and just go dut, 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 and just like little cuts along the way.
Yeah.
And maybe we could do one more, and that will be the fly. And obviously, you can change colors of the polar chenille. You can change colors of the squidfish stuff. But then you have a pretty. So I don't know. This fly, my guess, is 6 inches long. It's a pretty meaty fly. It's a pretty chunky little squid. You could do skinnier ones.
Quick question here from Alan. In your experience, are most squid flies more about profile or movement?
It's a little bit of both. I think it's profile. It's always about profile with striper flies, right? Because of how they're looking at them. So the most important thing, I think, is to get the proportions right and to get the shape right. You know, what was it? I guess Kenny Abrams used to say they have a fusiform shape. It's the only context in which I've ever heard anyone use that word. But that's kind of right. It is. They're these kind of elongated, really tapered things. If you look at what incredibly effective swimmers they're really designed to swim, and they go backwards and forwards too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think we're about done. We'll just neaten this thing up. We have about $600 worth of materials on here. So you could lose it to a 2-pound bluefish. Somebody just had a question. It might have been Henry.
I'm only fishing that with 100-pound test. I don't want to lose it.
Like I said, so obviously I know people have caught lots of blues and stripers on this, but we've used them in Baja. They really like them in Baja because there are a lot of offshore fish. Squid are pretty much everywhere in the world.
So Henry has a really important question, which is, do you prefer Fra Diavolo or white water butter sauce with your squid?
I liquid fusion with liquid fusion with some Softex to make it carcinogenic. And that is the, what would we call this? The full dress squid, the OC squid, the overly complicated squid.
How close to shore can you fish this fly, in surf or in calm water?
Anywhere. You could go fish it, like we said, at Mill Pond in Connecticut. You could fish it. You could definitely fish it from the beaches. From the beaches, to me, I would like deeper water near the beach. But so for instance, Dave, where you fish on the flats, you're not going to be throwing a 5-inch squid fly at stripers on white sand flats, in 1.5 feet of water, right?
The creeks right around the corner from those flats, you can fish them.
Absolutely. And some of those actually have deep water, right? Some of those creeks are not, but you don't need, so like I said, I've seen them out in the rips in Montauk. I've seen them in close in Montauk. Who we should ask is if Joe Maz and Mark Sherman are still on, those guys have seen squid in all kinds of places from rips. What's amazing is that one fall where they were all over, I remember seeing the seagulls, flying away with squid in their mouth. That was the only time I've seen that. And that was very late in the season. I don't know if Joe and Mark remember, but I think that was November, right? So that's what I'm saying. It's not about migrations and stuff. They're there all the time. Henry's saying the rip of Breezy gets squid. Well, that's in some ways, that's the rip off of Breezy is actually a pretty classic spot. People said Watch Hill is crazy good on the reef. But in terms of fishing from the beach, you can absolutely Kenny Abrams used to fish his squid fly all the time from the beach. He had a 10.5-foot rod. He only used a floating line. Sometimes you put lead core on it and he'd fish it from the beach, and it's kind of cool. He would steer it around in between the waves, and he had those beautiful flat wings. Yeah, November is the month, Mark is saying, and you can just see it in different places. It's not a guaranteed thing, but I guess I've seen them every month from, I don't know if I've seen them in April, but from certainly May through November.
So Johnny,
do you ever use
squid? Oh, sorry, Lou. With that squid, what line weight would you be using?
I tend to fish 9 weights for stripers. I don't, I find, I know David, on your flats, you're throwing smaller flies, and 8 weight is kind of a nice thing, but my default is 9 weight. This is no problem with a 9 weight. And also, in the waters that I've tended to fish, which are slightly deeper waters, I'm using a sinking line, like a 350, but an intermediate 9 weight, no problem with that fly.
Do you ever weight that fly?
What I've done is I've put cones on the hook, You get a slotted cone, which will go around the bend of even a big hook, and you can bury it. What's really cool is to get a painted orange cone and then put white kinky fiber around it, and then the orange kind of glows out from the middle of it. You can also
Jonny, can you take that fly out of the vise and just show
So first of all, to see the point of the articulation is that, right? This is fully mobile, right? It can go up and down, and you will see. Look at some of those pictures online. You'll see squid like this, bent. I made this one kind of chubby. I could certainly trim it down. It would sink faster. They're definitely like the funny picture I have that of me holding a squid with a clouser. That thing is pretty thick for a 6-inch squid.
Hey, Jonny, I want to get to one question, not totally related to the fly you tied, but Phil McCarthy is reminding us, Lou, about the trouble with stiff materials in dubbing loops.
Yeah, that's right. Phil, you're the guy who sent the email. You know what? What I was going to show you is, we're going to go way off base. Unfortunately, I have some saltwater flies, some tarpon flies that Rio's going to be producing, but I'll show you this, Phil. I don't know if you can see this or this fly. These flies have actually more like what you would call a traditional muddler head, but the way that they are made is with deer hair in a loop and marabou fibers. You had asked about feather fibers. But what you can do is, if you take some deer hair, and I mean not bucktail, I mean like the kind of deer hair that you flare for muddler, not the super thick kind that you would use for like a bass bug, but your sort of typical spinning deer hair. And you get a clamp, right? And you take some deer hair and you spread it out for, let's say, 2 inches. You lay the clamp on its side, then take your feather fibers and lay it on top of that clamp, right? So the deer hair fibers are sticking in the clamp point first. In this case, it was marabou. I have about, I don't know how much you can see that, but there's probably 3 or 4 different colors of deer hair and marabou in it. Have that, lay your marabou fibers, your turkey fibers, your pheasant tail fibers, whatever it is, but spread them out on top of the deer hair. Clamp them with another clamp at the base, right? And you can feed them into a dubbing loop. If you have that stiff material like the deer hair, it will keep all of those feather fibers separated. Now, I don't remember which ones you asked about, Phil. I think was it turkey fibers? There are fibers that want to stick together, right? Like, it's one thing I don't like about wrapping certain things. I like wrapping, I tried it the other day with mallard flank fibers. It was a little squeegee. They wanted to stick together. But the critical thing is to spread them out. It's like you're laying out a deck of cards on top of the baseline of deer hair. And the other thing that, I'll tell you is, when you wrap deer hair in a dubbing, is turkey. Yeah, so if you took those turkey fibers, make sure that they're half again as long as the deer hair fibers. Those deer hair fibers will be like the substrate, like a composite loop that will keep those turkey fibers separate. And you may screw it up the first or second time, but it'll work great. And the other thing about this is, so there's a lot of deer hair in this. For whatever reason, if you pack in deer hair like the traditional way to tie a muddler, it's really buoyant. You tie it this way, it sinks no problem. Because I use these on a spay rod in the Delaware River, with a sink tip with like a mo tip or something, will just drop like that.
That's great.
The thread I would use, that's a good thing. One thing about deer hair is it's kind of thick in diameter. So you can either take your trout thread and wrap it around twice, double up on your dubbing loop. But there's this 140 denier ultra thread. It's that, I think it's Wapsi's thread, I think. And I hate it for all other things because it's too flossy. But I find I can spin that thing to a fare thee well and it just doesn't break. It really grips it. So that's my current favorite for that. So often I'll tie the fly with another thread. Then when I get to the dubbing loop, I'll use the 140 denier.
That's great. Jonny, can you hold the squid fly up again? Because that was just so incredible. And then, Lou, maybe we'll get back on after Jonny shows this.
Yeah, sounds good. What a beauty.
That is so great. And just lay it in your hand so we can get...
I actually, because I'm compulsive, right? I feel like there's too much material back here, so we're going to do a little more. It's
I don't know, perfectionist, which is great.
Did you guys ever tie bass bugs? Like I used to watch.
Yes.
like back in the day, Jimmy Nicks had these videos in like the late 80s, early 90s. We had like 50. I would sit there and I would spend 45 minutes stacking my deer, and then one swipe with the razor blade, my bass bug would become more like a small bunker, and then before you know, it was like a sand eel, and after that, it was like a chum fry.
Dahlberg divers.
Exactly.
I used to tie those all the time. That's beautiful. Well, let's jump on. Yeah.
Sounds good. Awesome. I mean, Jonny, what an incredible evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I know I'm tying some squid flies, David, this weekend.
So. You know what? I'm embarrassed. All my squid flies are in a different box in Long Island. I wanted to throw a couple up, but you know, I don't want to steal Johnny's thunder. I mean, that was a spectacular display of tying prowess right there. So yeah.
And you know, Jonny, you talked about Pops a little bit earlier. We've been asking everyone on the show this season just to provide a sort of a final reflection on, you know, what Bob meant to you, but also maybe more importantly, what he meant to this, you know, this whole
community,
community and art and science and passion that we have around fly fishing and fly tying.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy one with Bob, right? Because one of the nicest people I've ever met. But I will tell you what sums up Bob. Two things that sum up Bob more than anything else, right? So plenty of people can tell you. Lefty Cray told me personally what he told many people: Bob's the greatest fly tyer of all time, and he truly was. He said he just sees things differently. But what he really was a teacher. So he's the one. Two people got me into sort of tying at shows, having flies commercially available, writing articles, and it was Henry Cowan, who we know is on here. Henry is the first person who introduced me. My first commercial flies were Orvis and then Fulling Mill. And Henry, you know, profiled some of my flies and got me to writing. And Bob Popovics, who set me up to write a column for fly fishing in saltwater. So he used to write a tying column. The main thing is that Bob said, okay, now that you're doing this stuff, you can't show off. Like if you're doing this to show people you're so cool and you know how to tie flies really well, then you've missed the entire point. You need to show people that they can do it, right? Because if you're just flashing your chops, like who cares, right? So people have different ways of doing that, right? Bob, there's so many little tricks, right? Bob would put the bucktail on, he would pull on his monothread, then he would release it, and the bucktail would readjust itself, and he'd release it. So there are all these little tricks. But he said, your goal is to teach people how to do it. And another thing that I think was really emblematic of Bob is when he wrote his second book, Fly Design, right? Which has all the ones that everyone is obsessed with now, like the bulkhead and the hollow fly and more modern versions of, the light cured resins and all kinds of things. It was, Bob told me, he said, I'm writing a new book. I said, that's awesome. And he said, I'm going to put you guys in it. I said, what do you mean? You're out of your mind. And he said, no, it is really, really important to me that you guys. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, my friends, like Steve Farrar, who's on there, you know, who truly one of my major inspirations in using all these materials. Also a phenomenal teacher and, you know, like Bob, just not a shred of ego. And then, you know, back then he was saying younger guys like you and Skoke and David Nelson. And I said, but why do you want to do that? I mean, there's tons of us who tried that. He said, because I feel like if I did anything for the sport, I sort of passed along this legacy. I want you guys to pass along this legacy so we all know that there's a history, that we all learn from each other. And it was just an incredibly kind thing. So I wrote this thing about him. And like, you know, it's like he almost cried when he talked about it because I talked about him personally. So for all of his innovations, I think the thing that he contributed is this sense that this is like a collective sport, that we do it together. He's the opposite of competitive. I don't think he was ever paid for a fly, not once in his life. And he gave stuff away left and right. So I think more than anything else, like, and I wasn't there for the, you know, like some of the guys on the phone, like Muzz, who went to his, you know, club when he was a kid. I wasn't there for that, but his whole thing was about sharing, doing it together. And it was a remarkable thing for a guy to be that talented and yet care much more about the community than any accolades for his own. You know, he's not somebody, he's not like, you know, posting flies on Instagram so people say, oh, that's so cool. He was so naturally gifted, people just noticed it, right?
Yeah.
All of them did. But that's not what he was about. He was just about teaching, passing it on.
That's
so
great.
that's what
that.
Bob left me with more than anything else. And I will tell you this, he never, ever had a conversation with me when he didn't ask me about non-fishing related stuff. How are the gigs going? How's Jacqueline's going? Your kids okay? Just because he knew that fishing was for, you're talking to a person who thinks about it 24 hours a day. It's just fishing, right?
Right.
Right. It was a means to an end.
Wow, Jonny, thank you. A little housekeeping. This is really important, I think. Last year we were giving those away, and we haven't done it yet this year. So if you send in a note to us, you know, Lou or I'll send you one, and you know, proudly display your colors on your fly box, your car. And also this weekend in Long Island, I'll be at the Long Island Fly Fishing Expo, and I should have a few of those stickers with me to give away. So come on by and say hello. And Lou, what we should also talk about Got One, Lou. What's going on with Got One?
Yeah.
You know, everyone, hope you are all using the Got One app. We've got a big new feature coming out this week, which is the ability to map all of your catches. So you'll be able in the app to see all the fish that you've caught and logged in Got One on a map. I've been having a blast going back.
It's really cool.
all my catches over the last season and so forth. And
all two of them?
So
no, it was all on my boat. I mapped them.
And then we've got some other great stuff coming up. So we have Saltwater Edge has their big fly seminar coming up in a few weeks. So for those of you interested, we got some great folks involved in that. And then April 26th, 27th, there's the Lefties Fly Tie
Fest.
Yeah, Fly Fest
yeah.
down in Vero Beach. I'll be there. Jonny, are you going to that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
That was a good, that's a long way to travel. They used to do it in I think it was in Annapolis back in the day.
That's right. Yeah.
Hey, Jonny, when's your next couple of gigs?
Right. I have a couple of weeks off, but let's see. March 23rd at a place called the Django, which is in the Roxy Hotel downtown.
Yeah.
That's my friends Ed Howard and Joe Strasser. Then a weekend at Mesro with like my OG favorites.
I'm
Billy
coming to
Drummond,
Mesro.
Billy Drummond and Desron Douglas. They're two completely legendary musicians. And then a week after that with Desron and a drummer to be named later. So that's
awesome.
So that's April 4th, 5th, and 10th. Awesome. March 23rd, April 4th, 5th, and 10th.
The drummer you had back in December when I saw you at Django was pretty great.
I just don't remember which gig that was, but
that's okay.
But all the people I play with are better than I. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jonny. What an incredible evening, and thanks to
everybody. Thanks
up.
for
appreciate everyone being here. Thanks,
Thanks
Jonny.
everyone for coming. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.